Welcome to the What If It's Not Depression Vodcast. I'm your host, Dr. Achina Stein, and today I am introducing to you Dana Kay. She is a board-certified holistic health and nutrition practitioner, two times international best-selling author, and the CEO and founder of the ADHD Thrive Institute, and the creator of the ADHD Thrive Method for Kids program. As a mother of a child with ADHD, she knows firsthand the struggles that come with parenting a neurodiverse child. But she also knows the freedom that is possible once parents learn to reduce ADHD symptoms. Dana has been featured in Forbes, Authority Magazine, Medium, Influensive, Thrive Global, and various others. She's also been a guest on multiple parenting and ADHD summits and podcasts. Her mission is to help families reduce ADHD symptoms naturally so that children with ADHD can thrive at home, at school, and in life. That is so awesome. And if you love this episode, please click the like button and subscribe. Welcome, Dana.
Thank you so much, Achina, for having me. I'm really, really excited to be here.
So am I, because I have not interviewed anyone, I don't believe, that has talked about ADHD, and especially ADHD in kids. And that's a tough population because you might know all the things that need to be done, but it's kind of hard to get a child to do some of these things. And I know we're going to dive into that some more, but I would love for you to start with your story because I know you started out as an accountant.
Yes, I did.
Like,
I
how did you get
did.
from
Why
accountant
did
to
you
what you're
share
doing?
that? I know. I know. Yes, I was completely removed from the health and wellness space and nutrition. And if you asked any of my family or friends who would be the least person that would come into this industry, they would say me. And as you said, I was in accounting, and I probably would have still been in there if my concerns over my son's health hadn't have grown as much as they did. I always knew, probably from the age of 2, that there was something a little bit different with him. And I would ask my friends, I would ask the doctors, is this normal? They would all say, yes, he's just a boy. He had so much energy. He would bounce off the walls and he wouldn't be able to sit in his seat at breakfast or dinner.
Mhm.
Then he'd start having these meltdowns over just the littlest thing. And I know we all go through the terrible 2 phase where we have those meltdowns, but that terrible 2 phase went into the 3 phase, then the 4 phase. And so,
Right.
they continued actually to get worse rather than better. And that's when sort of my gut was telling me that something was missing. Now, it was never sort of being brought up by the teachers at school, but eventually it all caught up at about at the age of 4, and his tantrums became even more severe, and his teachers started noticing the differences as well. And that's when he was diagnosed with ADHD. And we went to our pediatrician. We actually went to a developmental psychiatrist who did a full analysis. He said, like, after the first 10 minutes of him being there, he could have diagnosed him, but we went back for multiple sessions and he was immediately put on medication.
Right.
So I was handed that prescription medication, and at first I felt relieved. I had a diagnosis. I wasn't a bad mum. This
Mhm.
wasn't my fault. And I had medication thinking, this was finally, we're going to get the help that we need.
Right.
And so at first it was great. But then the dosage increased. Then side effects came out, and his doctor gave us another prescription to counteract the side effects of the first one. And this continued until he was on 3 strong medications, and he
Right.
was 5 by then. And
Oh,
the doctor
God.
suggested the 4th medication to counteract new side effects. And that's when I was like,
Yes.
this doesn't seem okay. And I just couldn't do it anymore. And, that's what led me to just throw my head into studies, journals, multiple
Hmm.
books, research, went back to school, did my holistic health degree, multiple specific certifications in this particular area, and really learned how food and other natural strategies can affect so many aspects of our lives. And I began to learn that ADHD symptoms can be reduced naturally.
Hmm.
Now, today, my son is thriving.
Mm-hmm.
Hasn't been on meds for years. He's in middle school. He's a straight A student, but most importantly, he's happy,
Mm.
and my family's happy, and we now have that peace and that calm in our house. And once I learnt about the importance of these strategies on behavior and the brain, and once I saw the changes that these could have on my own family, I just couldn't keep this information to myself. And I really didn't want anyone else to have to go through the struggles that my family went through all of those years.
Right.
And over the years, I've now been able to have the privilege of work with close to 1,000 other families get to the same place as me just so much quicker.
Oh, that's so awesome to hear. So awesome to hear. And the story that you have given, I hear over and over and over again. It's
Mm-hmm.
just like, yes, initially you're relieved, you have a diagnosis. It's like, oh, finally, we're gonna have a normal life, right? But it does
Totally.
start creating other problems down the line. And it's great that we have medications. In my opinion, it's great that we have medications to be able to at least put it to a stop and find some
Completely agree.
control. But then I feel people should really do what you did, was to then find out, well, what caused this all in the first place, get to
Mm-hmm.
the root causes, bring the body back into balance, and then taper and discontinue the medications. So you don't have to take them for the rest of your life. And because you're right, after a while, you start having side effects, and then you start treating the side effects. And sometimes the side effects look like new mental health diagnoses,
Totally.
right? Because, stimulants can cause bipolar disorder,
Mm-hmm.
cosmetic episodes, and then you're given another diagnosis. And it really is a vicious circle. It's sometimes for a lot of people, there are certainly going to be a group of people who take medications and they have no side effects and they're on that one medication for 10, 15 years,
And that's
and that's
great.
great for them.
Yeah.
Great for them. But there's a lot
Yeah.
of people who also have side effects immediately, right?
Mm-hmm.
They can't tolerate any of the medication. So what are they left to do? So that's why I'm so happy to have you on the show talking about all of these things. So where do people start? Like where, let's
Yeah.
just dive right in. Where do people start?
Yeah, look, that's always the $1 million question. I remember when I was going through this with my son, I would just spend hours and hours and hours on these forums and these Facebooks and these blogs just reading, and I was just so overwhelmed on where to start. And I
Mhm.
think we bring it back to the basics. And I'm sure that you've talked about it on the podcast before, but the basics starts with the foundation of health, and the foundation of health is diet. And I think, and I'm just going to sort of segue a little bit here.
Mhm.
And, you know, I think it's so important, when children are diagnosed with ADHD, the first course of treatment that doctors suggest is that medication. And many of them just don't even tell parents that altering the diet can
Mhm.
significantly reduce ADHD symptoms. And this is what happened with us. So I
Mhm.
very, very, very much advocate that instead of medication, it should be a food first approach.
Mhm.
Every doctor should be taught that a kid especially, one that's not in crisis, should have a food first approach. And that's really the message that I want to spread out there.
Right.
But
And it's
kids with
not, may I
AD,
just say, add to that, it's not just, attention issues or ADHD, also depression, also
yes,
anxiety, also all of those mental health or emotional issues.
totally.
Food is first, always
Yeah.
should be first. Yep, agreed.
Definitely. And look, a lot of the time ADHD comes with depression. A lot of the time, depression, it can be misdiagnosed as ADHD or anxiety. And so that's all in that circle. So I completely agree.
Mhm.
Now, again, I think that you've probably talked a lot about the gut brain connection,
Mhm.
but ADHD symptoms are exacerbated by inflammation. And so the key place to start is to reduce that inflammation. And that really happens with food. Diet is the foundation of everything. When you're building a house,
Mhm.
your house will fall down if you don't have a solid foundation, and our body is exactly the same. And so that's what we do. We start with food, and we start by reducing inflammation. And so for me, I get asked, what are the worst foods for children with ADHD?
Mhm.
And the top three, in my opinion, are gluten, dairy, and soy. And
Mhm.
these are the top three culprits driving inflammation in the body, and they're
Mhm.
highly inflammatory, and they can lead to an immune response. They can lead to leaky gut, which I'm sure you've talked about before.
Yes. Mhm.
But I also recommend families of children with ADHD avoid artificial flavors,
Mhm.
artificial colors, and excess sugar. So, these are
Bingo,
the
bingo,
real.
bingo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally,
Yes.
totally. And probably the listeners out there are thinking to themselves, oh my gosh, how am I going to get my child not to eat artificial flavors, artificial colors, and so much sugar?
Mhm.
They are provided so much candy these days in school at
Mhm.
the end of a sports game.
Mhm.
And it's in my opinion ridiculous, but there are definitely strategies that we can implement to help the families get to that stage. There are better for you treats, and there are all of these things you can do to overcome those challenges. They're not the be all and end all, and many people have success to overcome them. But I think that these foods that I said are the top inflammatory foods, and
Mhm.
once we can remove them, we can start reducing inflammation. The
Mhm.
biggest change that we see to start literally can happen within a week.
Mhm.
And it's a reduction in tantrums, it's a
Mhm.
reduction in meltdowns, the length of time that they take, the severity, the frequency. That was the first thing that changed with my son within two
Mhm.
weeks of actually removing these foods out of the diet.
Mhm. I agree. Actually, my son had depression, anxiety, and ADHD symptoms, and he was on four meds.
Mm,
And but this was all at the age of 14. And within weeks, there was a change in many things, including his constipation and eczema. The mental health symptoms took a little bit longer to follow.
yeah,
But you're right, though. I've seen in my patients within a couple weeks, even as early as 1 week, a
yeah.
noticeable difference. But it was gluten, soy, and dairy for my son as well. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, but it's really not just about what to take out. It's obviously
yeah,
what to put back in as well.
absolutely. Hmm.
And I'm sure you've talked about it a lot, really focusing on whole foods. If you
Hmm.
can't pronounce something on a label, put it back. If it's got a list of 20 different ingredients in it, put it back. So,
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
read the back of the label, not the front of the label.
Yes,
Absolutely.
definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah. So tell us, about what foods are, if for specifically children who have ADHD, what foods are healing and what foods are harmful in that population.
Yeah, look, the harmful ones are the ones that I just
Yes.
said. But
Hmm.
as far as what to eat, we're really focusing on whole, nutritious, fresh fruits and veggies, grass-fed animal protein, meat, poultry, seafood, and eggs. I have a lot of vegetarians that come to me as well, but I personally believe that it is super important for a growing body and a growing brain to get that animal protein, that B12 that comes
Hmm.
from things like organ meat. We definitely have ways of getting a kid to have organ meat, and there's not. Families are probably thinking to themselves, "Oh my gosh, how would I get my child to eat organ meat?" We actually have a supplement that's 100% grass fed, grass finished organ meat from beef,
Hmm.
and it's just so wonderful. So they don't have to tolerate the taste.
Right.
Things like plenty of healthy fats. They feed the brain. It's
Hmm.
super important. Avocado oil, coconut oil, olive oil, but also drinking plenty of spring waters, because you're avoiding harmful chemicals in some waters, but also water helps detox the body and remove toxins that are already there. And to get kids to drink more water, we do things like put fruit in it, put basil or mint or watermelon and mint, and it just really gives that really nice flavor.
Hmm.
um, and so all of these foods really provide the body and the brain with the
Hmm.
nutrients it needs so it can function best. Now, we do also look at food sensitivity panel with kids as well while we're healing the gut, because those foods can also cause inflammation in the body, and that's very individualized. And so, for example, my son was highly reactive to raspberries. I mean, who would have thought raspberries are healthy? And so we removed them out of his diet. We worked on healing the gut, and then we were able to add that back in as well.
Hmm. Hmm. Great, great. So then, I know you mentioned, like, gosh, how do we get these foods into kids. Do you have any specific strategies for
Yes.
children in order to, implement these dietary changes?
Definitely, because it can be hard, and parents are like, well, how am I going to do that? That's really the number one challenge that we face. And what I sort of say to families is Rome wasn't built in a day, and transforming your family's diet won't be complete in a day either. And for me, the worst challenge I had was trying to do that in day one. And that's what I did. I took out gluten, dairy, soy, all of 40 food sensitivities in day one. Let me just tell you, I developed panic attacks because I was like, what am I going to feed my son? I'd never done anything like this before. So it's really not a race, it's a marathon, and it's really okay to take it slowly. It's okay to take it one step at a time, and you need to work out a pace that's doable for you and your family. And that might be one change a week or one change every 2 weeks, and you need to give yourself permission, and that's totally okay.
Right.
Now, we want to take the child on the journey as well. And so changing one snack at a time, when you finish one snack, replace it with a better alternative.
Mhm.
Start with breakfast. Breakfast is pretty easy to mix up and change. And once you're comfortable that you're now eating a better for you breakfast,
Mhm.
move on to one dinner a week.
Mhm.
Most of the dinners that we eat can be made gluten, dairy, and soy. And a perfect example of that is tacos. Buy
Mhm.
some organic corn taco shells. The meat's the same, just check your spices to make sure there's no gluten in them.
Mhm.
Lettuce, tomato, onion, salsa. My best advice right now is if you've never had dairy free cheese, don't try to start with it straight away because you're not going to like it. It's not going to be the same as dairy cheese. So, what I actually suggest is just stop cheese for a while. And then
Right.
once your taste buds have forgotten what cheese tastes like, then maybe sprinkle a bit on your tacos, things like that.
Right.
Yeah, so there's
That's a
lots of
great.
different tips, and I think the biggest one is starting slow. Picky eating is another big
Mhm.
a big challenge that we come across, but I will say about 70% of the families that I work with have picky eaters, and it's not impossible. I had one family, Renee, it was the mum's name, and her son came to me eating 5 foods. And
Mm.
it's common, it's really common. And they'd spent a year in feeding therapy and they hadn't gotten anywhere. And
Mhm.
when we actually started reducing inflammation through the diet and changing the diet, removing the food sensitivities, and healing the gut, his palate started to open up.
Mhm.
And it's actually wonderful to watch. This kid now eats over 200 different foods, like in a
Mhm.
space of less than a year. But we have lots of different strategies that we bring in for that. Things like food chaining. I always say smoothies are great for kids because we
Mm.
can actually get in some really good nutrients and superfoods that they won't even taste.
Right.
And a lot of families, the mistake they make is they're like, yes, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make this big green smoothie. Their kids are going to go,
Uh-uh.
as if.
Right. Right.
So, they might be used to drinking chocolate milkshakes.
Right.
So let's start with a base that they're used to.
Right.
Chocolate milkshake, okay? So what we're going to do is we'll change out maybe 3/4 of the milk, keep 3/4 of the normal milk, and a
Right.
quarter of the non-dairy milk. Let them
Right.
drink that for a bit.
Right.
Adjust the taste buds. Then make it half normal milk and half dairy-free milk.
Right.
Let them drink that for a few days and then slowly adjust from there. So you're making these small little changes so you can bring their taste buds along, not just shove them straight from a chocolate milkshake into a green smoothie. We're going to take these steps. Then what you might do is you might put in some strawberries into that chocolate dairy-free milkshake.
Right.
So you're bringing in some strawberry flavor. Then you might reduce the amount of chocolate and bring in some cocoa powder instead. So
Right.
we're making small, slow steps along the way to take the kids on the journey and to take their taste buds on the journey as well,
Yeah.
because it can take 15 to 20 times for a kid to accept a new flavor or a new texture. So you just keep that in your back of your mind. If they say, yuck, I don't like that, keep
Yes.
trying.
Yes. And it also takes the microbiome on a journey as well, because it's those foods that are actually feeding the microbiome and cultivating those good bacteria and which will then displace the bacteria that really wants the sugar. right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the dysbiotic bacteria and the yeast that really want these other artificial things, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
the microbiome will come along as well, and it's really the microbiome that changes the taste buds,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak. So yeah, those are great ideas, excellent ideas to
Yeah.
start that way. Yeah,
Yeah.
some children have issues not so much with taste, but with texture. And
Mm-hmm.
so even I've actually had situations where kids don't want to have a smoothie, right?
I've got a good tip for that one.
I'll
I've
go
actually got a
ahead.
great tip. Yeah. So
Yes.
we have lots of kids that don't like drinking smoothies. And so I asked the parents, do they like eating ice cream?
Mm,
And most of the time they say yes. And so I say, okay, well, what type of ice cream are they used to? By this time, they're probably already eating dairy-free ice cream. So,
mhm,
it might be a chocolate dairy-free ice cream. I said, okay, well, let's make a chocolate dairy-free smoothie with
mhm,
cocoa powder and some other things to make it a bit sweeter, but make it really, really thick
mhm,
and like ice cream texture. And let's put it in a bowl and give the kid a spoon. And then they
mhm,
start eating it, and it's
mhm.
like ice cream, and they're very excited about it. And then what you do is you slowly add a little bit more of the liquid. So it's a little bit liquidly. They're still eating it from a bowl. They're still eating it with a spoon,
Mhm.
and you will slowly take it from that thick texture to a liquidy, but you're bringing them on the journey. Then what you do, you say, "Oh, darling, I've run out of my ice cream bowls. They're all dirty. Here, I'm just going to put the ice cream in a cup," and they eat it out of a cup. Okay, and then you like transfer them to a straw. So
Wow.
it's these little techniques that you just don't throw them in the deep end and hope that they swim. You're, going to teach them how to swim along the way.
That is awesome. 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 So I'm sure people will get the point and in the way that you described it, little by little by little. And they probably need to keep track in a journal, about what they've done and how much those increments are.
Yeah,
Because it's
totally. And it is
starting,
about writing. Sorry?
and not just stopping and starting, just going along little by little by little. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that it brings, what I find is that all of a sudden you're making all these little changes and you turn around and you think, wow, look how far we've come. And it's our new normal now. And when it becomes your new normal, changes are easy.
Hmm.
Families out there might be used to, as I said, Taco Tuesday, for example, and they're used to that. That's their normal because that's what they've been doing every Tuesday for a period of time.
Right.
Let's just swap that out.
Right.
And before too long, they would have been doing a different meal for Tuesday, and that will become their new normal. So it's just that mindset shift of like, yes, it all seems so scary, but we're just making a small change one at a
Mhm.
time. And then all of a sudden, it does become your new normal. Now, there are many other things that, challenges that family come into, things like birthday parties and school
Right.
functions,
Right.
restaurants. Where do you go to eat out? My tip for restaurants is like just spend a little bit of time up front. Where do you normally go? Write it down. Go onto their website. What could you order that is better for you? Call ahead. Say what can we order, and actually plan what you're going to order before you go there. So your kids aren't going to be like, oh my god, I want this, I want this. But actually prep them to say we're going to this restaurant, but this time we're going to be having X, Y, Z. So they're prepped ahead. They know in their mind we're going here and that's what we're going to eat. So they're
Mhm.
not like, well, I usually eat this, but you're now giving me this. If
Mhm.
you do the work ahead of time and you've got all your favorite restaurants and what you'll order, when you actually don't feel like cooking and you're like, oh my gosh, I just need to go pick up something for takeaway, it's already prepped for you and it's not hard. But
Mhm.
if you don't feel like cooking and you haven't prepped ahead and you go and you're like, it's all too hard, I can't do this, it's too overwhelming,
Mhm.
I'm just going to go through the drive through.
Right.
So just spending 30 minutes when you start to make these changes and nut it all out, it's all there ready for you.
Mm.
When things get hard, we go out, we eat out all the time. I don't even prep ahead anymore. We've been eating this way for so long.
Mhm.
I know that we're always going to find something, except for in small towns in the middle of America, where I got caught once on a road trip. We were in this place that had like 1,000 residents or something, and there was a gas station,
Right.
and that's all we could eat. So
Right.
we just had some chips, but and then drove to the next town. So, you know, we go out, my kids will eat burgers and a gluten-free bun.
Mm,
Most of the fries are gluten-free. You just need to ask specifically because sometimes they put flour on them. We
mm,
eat sushi without the soy sauce.
mhm.
We go to Mexican, carne asada, rice and beans, and just make sure that there's no dairy or gluten on it. So there's many places that we go really frequently, and we always find things that are gluten dairy free.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
And it really, and as the years go by, the restaurants are getting better and better about providing those options. And it's not just eliminating something off the plate. It's actually is
yeah,
gluten, dairy, or maybe
e-
even soy free, or saying what has soy, or there's so much more education around it, which is
totally.
fantastic. So it does make it
Yeah.
easier. What are your tips about plane rides? Going on a plane, just bringing,
Plane rides, that's a good one.
yeah.
Look, I always take food with us.
Yeah.
Plane rides, I actually don't even like the plane ride food anyway.
Don't give
And
food anymore except
yeah,
for
I know,
nuts
I
and
know.
crackers.
Exactly,
Not
exactly.
even
So,
nuts, actually.
yeah, I always pack for us to go, even though, even sometimes when we went to Australia, we would always eat before we got on the plane, and I would pack snacks with us. And going to Australia, it's only sort of well, there's a couple of flights, but the main big one is about 15 hours, and we're sleeping most of the time. So we have a big meal before we go to sleep, wake up. And a lot
Right.
of the time, the breakfasts can actually be gluten dairy free. And when you're going international, they will actually accommodate it.
Hmm.
So a lot of the time, it might be eggs or
Hmm.
sausage or things like that. So
Right.
it actually works out quite well.
Right. Yeah. Again, it comes down to planning. It really comes down to
Yeah.
planning,
Yeah.
planning ahead. Yeah. Great. Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's one thing I wanted to comment on, because you talk about it as a family. This is what families do, and I love that you say that, because oftentimes when it is one person in the family that has a problem and they're
Mm,
considered the sick child, and that they sometimes what people will do, and I actually strongly against this, is just change the diet for the child. And I
mm-hmm.
strongly encourage that the whole family make the change, because honestly, everyone's going to get better.
1,000%.
Everyone's going to get better. And then it's just a wellness journey, as opposed to fixing the sick child, and
Mm,
having it, perceived that way, makes the child feel bad, makes the child feel like they're putting everybody else out. And, why can't I just be normal, right? As
mm-hmm.
opposed to
Mm-hmm.
normalizing it. This is what we're doing for the whole family, because it's best for everyone. And honestly, the rest of the world should follow us.
Yes, I
Right?
completely agree with you. I always suggest that families do it as a family approach. The families that have the best success are the ones that everyone does it together, because if you've got chocolates and gluten crackers in your cupboard, and you're saying to your kid, "You can't have that, but I can have that."
Right.
What do
Yeah.
you think's going through their mind?
Right.
What type of message is that sending? So definitely the families that do it all together are the ones that have the greatest success, and the parents feel better as well. I've had so many stories where parents, I had this one lady, she could sometimes hardly get out of bed because she had such bad hip inflammation,
Mhm.
and she was waiting for a specialist appointment, and to get an appointment to find out where the inflammation was coming from. She started this program for her two kids, and they did it as a family. 10 weeks into the program, the doctor rang and said, "I've got an appointment for you." And she's like, "I don't need to come anymore.
Mhm.
My inflammation in my hip joint has completely
Mhm.
disappeared." And
Mm.
that was just changing the diet. That wasn't even with supplements. That wasn't
Right.
even looking what is going on in the root cause. For
Yeah.
her, it was just taking out gluten,
Right.
dairy, and soy.
Yes. Yes. And it could be anything. It doesn't have to be joint pain. It doesn't have to be,
Mm-hmm.
it could, so many people improve in so many ways that they didn't even imagine that it was even connected. Didn't
Yeah.
even know.
No,
Yes.
well, I had another lady who she has a family history of high cholesterol, and she was in her 40s, and she's always had high cholesterol ever since she was a teenager. It was
Mhm.
just, genetics apparently.
Mm.
And so she was always high cholesterol, and she went through the program with her daughter, and she went to the doctor for an annual checkup, and he's like, your cholesterol's dropped 30 points. I have never seen it in normal ranges like the whole time you've been an adult. And
Mm.
he's like, what have you been doing? And she's like, oh well, I've changed my diet for my daughter. And he's like, keep doing it. And
Mhm.
so, to have that reaction when most doctors would actually just put them on cholesterol medication,
Right.
and but this, she changed her diet, she's back
Mhm.
in normal ranges. But
Mhm.
before, it was just genetics and there was nothing that they could do about it.
Right, right. Yes, it's really a shame. And, fortunately, things are coming along in the medical world where more and more doctors are learning about it, but still not enough.
Still
But
not enough,
certainly
yes.
it's better than 10 years ago, I can tell you
Yes.
that.
Yes.
And and functional medicine is starting to be taught in medical schools. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely,
That's great.
definitely things are changing, and food is absolutely medicine. And more and more providers, including medical doctors, MDs and DOs, are learning these things too. So, yeah. So, we have about maybe 10 more minutes. I would love for you to impart more wisdom while we have that time. you know,
Yeah.
yeah. So, you mentioned some like underlying stressors
Mm-hmm.
could be potentially contributing to ADHD. Can you talk
Yeah.
about those things?
Yeah, great question. And one or more, there's, it can be multiple sometimes that are really underlying, that are aggravating ADHD symptoms. Things like nutritional deficiencies and food intolerances.
Mhm.
As I said, my son was sensitive to raspberries, so that was driving inflammation in his body.
Mhm.
Another child I worked with a few years ago had a banana sensitivity and
Mm.
was like riddled with eczema, and the eczema reduced when we took out gluten and dairy, but it didn't completely go away. When we actually took out banana, it completely disappeared. This kid was on 4 different medications and
Mm.
now is on none. So, once we learn about those sensitivities, we can temporarily remove the food, heal the gut, help bring down that inflammation, and, eventually be able to add it back in. Other
Mhm.
things like leaky gut, the breakdown of the lining of the gut, the gut
Mhm.
brain connection, which you've probably talked about, is
Mhm.
a big thing for ADHD symptoms. I'm just going to talk about it in terms of ADHD,
Mhm.
but 95% of serotonin and 50% of dopamine are made in the gut.
Mhm.
And these are our neurotransmitters that are responsible for things like balancing our emotions and our mood, our cognitive function. And
Mhm.
emotional dysregulation is a common symptom of ADHD. And
Mhm.
so many parents don't realize that the emotional dysregulation actually starts in the gut, where that serotonin and that dopamine are made.
Mhm.
So the problem then is, not the emotions themselves, but the fact that the correct amounts of these vital neurotransmitters are not being made in the first place. So
Right.
by working to improve the gut, people find that with ADHD, the emotional dysregulation problems solve themselves. And, that's what I was saying earlier, in that it can take 1 to 2 weeks. The first thing that changes is the tantrums and the meltdowns,
Right.
because the gut is starting to heal.
Right.
But the other main part that of the brain that talks to the gut is the frontal lobe,
Mm.
and the frontal lobe is involved in attention and focus and executive function and planning and organizing and problem solving, all areas that people with ADHD suffer with. And
Mhm.
so many people believe that because all of those things are located in the brain, because the frontal lobe is in the brain, people are under the impression that the brain is what needs care, when in
Mhm.
reality, it's the gut that's also causing the problem.
Mm.
So once we can heal that gut, it can help the brain. And I like to talk about it in reverse.
Mhm.
So I'm sure you felt, butterflies in your stomach when you're nervous about something. And that's a perfect example of that gut brain connection.
Right.
Our bodies perceive whatever we're nervous about as a stressful situation and triggers that raw emotion in the gut,
Mhm.
resulting in those butterflies. But
Absolutely. Mhm.
That's the brain talking to the gut, but the reverse is also true. So the gut will talk to the brain, specifically the frontal lobe, in relation to ADHD,
Right.
and so that's why we definitely work to heal the gut, and that's the biggest place that we start
Mhm.
beyond food. It's definitely the biggest place that gets the best results.
Mhm.
Other areas that can be driving inflammation are environmental toxins. That's a big one,
Mhm.
and that not only breaks down the gut, but it like causes chaos in the body. And so we really look to improve the family household, changing out things like cleaning products and personal care products to reduce the toxic load on the body, because when the body's in a state of inflammation, you're adding all of these other things that are increasing that inflammation. I like to look at it kind of like a bucket.
Mhm.
All of these things are going in: bad diet, environmental toxins, heavy metals,
Mhm.
leaky gut. And
Mhm.
it's not until the bucket becomes full that
Mhm.
symptoms start to come out, because the bucket can't hold them anymore and it starts to tip over. So when the
Right.
bucket tips over, that's when symptoms come out. So we really need to reduce that toxic load by changing all of these cleaning products. Heavy metals is a big one for kids. I'm not going to talk about vaccines. I'm, not against vaccines, but when you've got a kids whose body's compromised in the first place, putting that really strong load on the body can send them into that bucket being tipped over.
Right.
There are other things like pharmaceutical medication can actually cause inflammation in the body, that causes that underlying symptoms that breaks down the gut. Another big one that we find with kids with ADHD is something called cryptopyrrole.
Mm.
Now, pyroles are a normal chemical byproduct in the body, and they attach to vitamin B6 and zinc, and they draw these elements out of the body when they're excreted through the urine. So, if
Mhm.
someone has elevated cryptopyrrole levels in the urine, it can result in a dramatic deficiency of zinc and B6. And
Mhm.
it's frequently identified in behavioral disorders, ADHD, depression,
Right.
aggression, things like that, and
Mhm.
symptoms such as like things like poor tolerance to physical and emotional stress, poor anger control, mood swings, poor
Mhm.
short-term memory, sensitivity to light and sound, tactile sensitivities, and a lot of those symptoms are very, very common with
Mhm.
ADHD.
Right.
So, I could keep going on and on and on, and I don't
No,
know if we have enough time,
no, no,
but
yeah, no, you can keep going on and on. We have some time. Yeah.
yeah,
What you got into was some of the things that might be missing that need to be replaced. And my next question, which we can go right into, is like, what are some things that parents can do? Certainly, some of these things should be tested, you know,
mm-hmm,
vitamin deficiencies and the mineral
yep,
deficiencies. But you're absolutely right. I see zinc deficiency, vitamin B6 deficiency as being up there, or having a zinc copper imbalance where the copper is
correct,
high and the zinc is low. And just by,
yep,
adding zinc, to the soup of nutrients, will bring that copper down. But you want to
yes,
keep an eye on the doses, obviously.
yes,
And it's important to do testing, but there are other B vitamins that are just as important for the brain besides vitamin B6, and the types of vitamins, like whether it's P5P, which is a reduced form of vitamin B6, which is
yep.
pyridoxine. Just so you know, audience, you got to be don't go out and take vitamin B6. You can actually have a neuropathy from taking too much of that vitamin.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important that you know what you're doing and you work with a practitioner when it comes to certain vitamins.
Yeah, definitely. There are some really beneficial supplements for kids with ADHD in
Mhm.
particular.
Mhm.
The top of that would be a good quality fish oil and omega-3,
Mhm.
omega-6 fatty
Absolutely.
acids.
Mhm.
There are a lot of studies supporting that. It can really support things like memory and hyperactivity, clear thinking, behavioral disorders, organizational skills, and yeah, lots and lots of studies. So that's my top tip for most people.
Mhm.
And really, that one you could probably do without testing fasting,
Hmm. Yeah.
and is always one of my top suggestions. Another one is a good quality probiotic.
Hmm.
And but some people react wrongly to probiotics. They could have a overload of histamine in the gut and not do
Right.
well on probiotics. So really, just making sure that when you're starting any supplement, if some of these are okay by themselves, but it's always good to do it with consultation of a practitioner. Um, the gut bacteria, as we've talked about, is super important. So keeping that gut balanced is really important as well. But they're not all made equal. That is for
Right.
sure. If you go to Target and try to
Mhm.
get a probiotic from Target, probably not your best type of probiotic. Definitely, you want to focus on ones that are quality, that don't have any artificial stuff in them, and are from a good, reputable source and are
Yeah.
stored well as well. Because you might buy one on Amazon and it could have been sitting on that shelf for a very long time. It could be near its use by date. It could have been in a really hot environment that could have broken down the
Hmm.
quality of the supplement. So making sure you're buying from a reputable source as well.
Right. And
And
shipping is
yeah,
also something you have to be
especially
careful
now.
about. Yeah, especially now,
Yes.
the heat waves, that are happening across the country in the summertime. But it doesn't even have to be a heat wave. Just in the summer weather, you have to make sure that certain probiotics are shipped with an ice pack.
Yeah.
So making sure, yeah, shelf life and ice pack. And I always tell my patients to go to local, health food stores that actually, have them in the refrigerated section where you can pull it out and buy it right
Yes.
there on the day when it comes to this kind of weather. But yeah, probiotics are definitely helpful. I mean, you're right that people can react to them. But one way to start, actually with lifestyle changes is to actually go back to food when it comes to that. So
Mm-hmm.
vegetables or rainbow variety of vegetables is what will get you to have a diverse microbiome. But then the next step would be fermented foods.
Yes.
Just even a teeny tiny bit. You only need a little bit. It doesn't have to be tons of it. Just having fermented carrot or pickle, eating pickles.
Yes.
So, and if you like hot food, kimchi.
Kimchi, love it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it's
I've
just
got a big thing of sauerkraut in my fridge, and I just literally eat it by the spoon. I just love it so much. But some people are like, "Well, there's no
yeah.
way that I'm going to get my kid to eat that."
I know,
And
I
look,
know.
again, start small, and
I
it
know.
takes 15 to 20 times to accept a new flavor and new texture. So just keep trying.
Right,
But
right.
I always take that food first approach. There's a lot of these things that you can get from food.
Mhm.
Kids tend to not eat the most variety of diet, but it's so important. People
Right.
get stuck in this like eat the same thing every day,
Mhm.
but to have that diverse microbiome, it's super important to get that variety for sure.
Right.
Another supplement that we suggest a lot is magnesium.
Yep, I was gonna say
And
that. Is there a certain type of magnesium that you see is
there's a
better?
couple of different types, and it really depends on the child. If they've
Mhm.
got constipation, we focus on magnesium citrate. If they're having trouble sleeping or that anxiety, we use, magnesium glycinate. If we
Right,
know that there's brain issues, we use magnesium threonate because it crosses the blood-brain barrier.
right.
It can help with anxiety, depression, sleep, hyperactivity, and research suggests that children with ADHD and anxiety or depression often have low magnesium levels, and
Mhm.
using a supplement can definitely have a calming effect on behavior and support all of those things that we talked about. It's
Absolutely.
used for over 300 important biochemical processes in the body, and so definitely beneficial. But you can also get it from food. But again, kids don't eat that widest variety of different types of food. I will say though, before I had my training, I'd read on some forum on Facebook that magnesium was the be all and end all for this family, and I was so excited. I couldn't wait for the magnesium to arrive. That was going to be the thing that was going to help my son, and it came, and it had the opposite effect on him, and he had
Mhm.
major meltdowns. And I was like, okay, I was so disappointed. So again,
Mhm.
working with someone that can really guide you through in knowing what's going to work for your bio individual child, because
Right.
everyone is
Different.
unique.
Yes.
One thing that doesn't work for one child, one thing that works for one child won't necessarily work for another.
Right. Right.
And another one that I love is vitamin D. I
Mhm.
mean,
Mhm.
it can work wonders to support mood, and ADHD, especially when taken with an omega-3 fatty acid.
Right,
One of the best natural ways, obviously, is to get it out into the sunlight, but
right.
that's not always possible, especially for me. I live in Seattle. It's a lot of the time very grey. We have like maybe 4 or 5 weeks of summer, and
Mm,
that is it. So we pretty
mhm,
much take a vitamin D supplement all year round.
mhm.
But you know, if you are in a climate that is has a lot of sunshine, then you might not need to take it all year round. Definitely in the
Right.
fall and winter months.
Yeah, most people do. Even if they do have sunshine, they tend to be indoors anyway
Yes,
for a variety
exactly,
of reasons because they're
exactly.
working or
Yeah,
they're too fair skinned that even 10 minutes out in the sun gets them burned and there's all sorts of reasons. But yeah, I agree with everything that you say. But I find most people, even adults, cannot get enough magnesium and
mm-hmm,
even if they try, it's just not enough. We're so depleted. Our food
mm-hmm.
are so depleted from magnesium. The broccoli from 50 years ago doesn't have the same amount of magnesium as it does now. So,
Definitely.
yeah. So when it comes to brain issues, I find that the combination of some of the things that you already mentioned, magnesium, really taking a good multivitamin with
Mm-hmm.
phytonutrients, but magnesium, zinc, probiotics, omega-3s, really that combination is a great foundation in the beginning while you're introducing all of these foods, just to calm the whole body down, just in terms of
Definitely.
inflammation and replacing what's been missing for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm. For
Yeah.
sure.
So, the one thing that, I've gone back and forth with, and I've decided that when it comes to food sensitivity, I tend to do food sensitivity testing only after repairing the gut lining, just to see what else needs to be taken out in terms of food, because from at least my adult population, and because I do see kids, but not as many as I see as adults, that everybody lights up like a Christmas tree when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
sensitivities because
Yeah.
of increased gut permeability, or AKA leaky gut. And so I tend not to do that because a lot can change just by going on a basic gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free diet, removing all the artificial flavors and etc. And then healing the gut and then doing the food sensitivity testing. But I'm wondering though that maybe for children who haven't accumulated all of these things over the years of just
Mm.
being alive, right? Young children, especially, that perhaps the food sensitivity should come first, and that will help to really pull out, targeted foods. Um,
Yeah.
but the other risk of doing food sensitivity early on is that people end up having orthorexia, right? Because they're so terrified of
Yeah.
eating certain foods that they end up being on five foods when you do testing like that. So I've kind of over the years have gone back
I
and
yeah.
forth. Yeah, so it's like,
I always go back and forth. I
yeah,
always try to look at, you know, what's going to work, what's not going to work, and it's a big debate for sure.
yeah,
That
yeah.
I'm always constantly having in my mind, and talking about with other practitioners as well. So that's a really good point that you bring up. I find that in order to really allow the gut to heal, to try and reduce the inflammation as much as possible, we don't necessarily take all of those foods out. We just focus on those ones that are really causing the highest reaction.
Mhm.
And, you know, I rather with kids have that targeted approach because, you know, they are going to be getting, they do tend to eat a lot of the same things. And what happens is that, you know, if they're constantly pounding that body with, say, corn, and corn is like off the charts high inflammatory,
Mhm.
that you know we're not going to get as far along in the gut healing process as
Mhm.
possible. And
Right.
so finding having that nailing it down rather than going on a complete elimination diet where you remove out egg, you remove out corn, you remove out all of this stuff, I just focus on gluten, dairy, and soy, take out the biggest heavy hitters on the food sensitivity panel, and then heal the gut. And I only do it once. I never retest
Mhm.
with food sensitivities because, you know, new ones will pop up. But by then, we've been able to reduce the inflammation enough in the body. We've been able to reduce those symptoms. We've been able to get them into a calmer state and really heal that gut.
Right, right. Great, great. Yeah, I'm glad we had that discussion because it's been it's nice talking about what other people do and why they do it.
Yes.
But it's also important, I think, for the audience to know that there are these nuances. There, it's not
Mm-hmm.
a cookbook. It really isn't a cookbook approach.
It
There's some
isn't.
nuances to all of
Th-
this.
There is, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. So, wow, we talked about some fantastic things. I feel like we covered a lot.
We did.
And, I want to make sure that people know how to get in touch with you.
Yeah.
I know you're offering a free breakfast guide. That's so
Yes.
great because so many people skip breakfast. That's a big no-no in my book. It's really important to have,
Especially for children.
especially for
Yeah.
children. They need gasoline in their tank, guys.
They do.
Yes. So, and that your website is ADHDthriveinstitute.com and you're on
Hmm.
Instagram and Facebook. So I will have all of those, that information in our show notes, as well
Fabulous.
as the email that goes out to my practice. And hopefully people will connect with you down the line if they're
Great.
interested in working with you. You do great work. Thank you so much for doing the work that you do. We so much need it, and we need to get some of these kids off of these stimulants and at least
Yes.
off that path of being on medication for as long as many children are. So
Yeah.
there
I will
are
also
other ways.
there are things they can do, and there is hope. So I think for families that are really struggling out there, I know the feeling. It is
Mhm.
super tough. There definitely is hope, and you can reduce ADHD symptoms naturally. My book actually just came out. It's called Thriving with ADHD, a
Mhm.
guide to naturally reducing ADHD symptoms in your child. You can find it on Amazon, or you can go on to my website, ADHDthriveinstitute.com/book.
Awesome. Great. Great. That is great. Thank you so much. So
You're
much for
welcome.
this, Dana. I really, really appreciate it. And have a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much.